He's the only other person I'm waiting on. Imam Nasif Majid.
He's here. He's here.
Yeah, but he's the only one just like not inside. He's like early. Thank you. Muhsin Siddiqui. Assalamu alaikum. Within the next 2 minutes, we're going to get started, so if everyone can take their seats. With the last name, the Merciful Benefactor, the Merciful Redeemer, this year for African American History Month, the Charlotte Muslim community has come together to honor the history and legacy of Omar Ibn Said, a writer and Islamic scholar who was enslaved and brought to the U.S. We have supporters throughout the state of North Carolina and a few outside of North Carolina who have joined in this effort, local masjids, Islamic community centers, and other Islamic organizations. And just to share our support, I'm going to share where these groups are coming from. Masjid Omar Ibn Said in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Masjid Ash-Shaheed, and again, thank you all for coming. Islamic Society of Greater Charlotte, Penny Appeal USA, Charlotte Tea House, Muslim Community Center, ICC South, Masjid Ali Shah, Masjid Al-Razak, Muslim Women of the Carolinas, and the list goes on. In an article by Baba Kenya, it shares the last known writing sample of Omar Ibn Said is dated July 27, 1857. Writing Surah Nasr in Arabic, in another article it shares the beginning of his autobiography, starts with Surah Mulk, Ayat 2. May Allah be pleased with Omar Ibn Said, as well as Tariq Beard. Tariq Beard purchased the handwritten autobiography and had it translated into the English language and later on published. We want to thank each and every one of you who came out tonight. My name is Sophia Baldwin. I'm your host for this evening, and I'm going to greet you with the beautiful salutation of peace. Assalamu alaikum. So we're going to have Hafiz Muhsin Siddiqui with the Al-Fatiha as well as Quranic recitation.
Assalamu alaikum. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الرحمن الرحيم. مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير. الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا وهو العزيز الغفور. صدق الله العظيم.
Next, we will have our resident Imam, Imam Khalil Akbar, give the welcome.
Thank you, dear. In the name of God, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer. Peace be unto you as Muslim greet. Assalamu alaikum. We praise God, the one Lord, creator of us all, who cares about all of his creation, and particularly about his human creation, who has created all of us from one soul we call Adam and his mate Eve. God says in the Quran, in our holy book, from them he has bred many men and women all over the world. That means that we have a common origin, and therefore we are brothers and sisters. So we come together tonight to recognize and honor the life and legacy, of Omar Ibn Said. Welcome to all of you who are present for this occasion. I want to give special recognition to those who organized this meeting. Brother Sean Ahmed, Brother Faris Hussein, Brother Maurice, Sister Sophia, Sister Rowan, Sister Rose, our Imam Atif Chaudhry of ISGC, Imam John Eder of the Muslim Community Center, Imam Adam Biya of Masjid Omar Ibn Said. Thank you for doing the heavy lifting to organize this program. Also, there were other participating imams. Imam John Ramadan of Masjid Al-Razak, Imam Khalid Grizz of the Community Mosque in Winston-Salem, and a host of other imams and mosques throughout the state. Thank you for giving your time and your energy to make this possible. To our honorable dignitaries, in fact, all of you are honorable people. We are told in our holy book that Almighty God has made all of the children of Adam honorable. So we greet all of you honorable people. We extend our greetings to all of you. We're in the 21st day of February. a month that was designated Black History by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who established the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History in 1915. Later, in 1926, Dr. Woodson proposed and launched the annual February observance of Negro History Week, which became Black History Month in 1976. It is believed that he chose February for the observance because February 12th was the birthday of Abraham Lincoln, and February the 14th was the accepted birthday of Frederick Douglass. Dr. Wilson published a number of scholarly books. Among his writing is a book that's entitled The Miseducation of the Negro. This is a book that I gave to my daughter when she was going off to college, to Howard University years ago. I gave it to her as a gift. One of the things that Dr. Wilson says in this book, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, when you go off to get education and what you learn empowers you to help other people in their communities, and you can't use that same information to help people in your own community, he said, you have not been educated, you've been trained. So I wanted her to get education and not be trained. That's why I gave her the book. Her mother, Kimberly Akbar. Those who push for change from the name Negro History Month to Black History Month were part of a movement that believed Negro was a designation of our former slaveholders. And among these people were Noble Drew Ali of the Moorish Science Temple, Honorable Elijah Muhammad of the Nation of Islam, and Malcolm X, who later began to use Afro-American. This group charged that the word Negro is an inaccurate epithet which perpetuates the master slave mentality in the minds of both black and white Americans. In the 60s, black became more popular because of the Black Power movement and the King of Soul, James Brown, who admitted that his song, I'm Black and I'm Proud, was inspired by the Nation of Islam. Consequently, black became the most popular designation. In the late 1970s and 80s, Imam W.D. Muhammad, who implemented a strategy to change his father organization from a color conscious organization to a human conscious organization, began to use the term Bilalian to identify with Bilal, who was a black man enslaved in pre-Islamic Arabia and freed by Abu Bakr, a companion of the Prophet. He reasoned that Bilal was our ancestor and our history were very similar to his. That designation did not catch on. So the Imam moved to African American, rejecting both black and Afro-American. He said that Negro meant black in Spanish. Therefore, to call ourselves black is the same as calling ourselves Negro. He said the Afro-American was not enough when compared to other groups that used, for example, Italian Americans and Jewish Americans, Irish Americans, to fully claim their national origin and not partially. So he said if we're going to acknowledge that we are descendants from Africa, we should do it fully, and instead of calling ourselves Afro-American, we should say that we are African Americans. Most of us think that it was the Reverend Jesse Jackson who started the use of this name in 1988. But I'm sorry to inform you that he did not. We believe that he was influenced by Imam W.D. Muhammad. He knew Imam Muhammad very well and was a close friend of the community, and one of the guests who spoke to a gathering of almost 20,000 people when the Imam became the leader of the Nation of Islam in 1975. Now, to give you a little background information, I think this may help us as we move forward tonight with our presentation. In the early 17th century, the African slave trade introduced Islam to North America. Many came from Muslim kingdoms of West Africa, but with time were cut off from their Muslim heritage and eventually lost their Muslim identity. From 1933 to 1975, Elijah Muhammad urged African Americans to rediscover their Islamic roots. That was what the Nation of Islam was really all about. Elijah Muhammad did not claim to teach religion. He said his job was to clean us up and get us ready for the mosque. Certainly the Africans transported here had religions other than Islam, but some historians estimate at least 30% of the 7 to 8 million people brought here were Muslim from areas in West Africa such as Senegal, Timbuktu, and Lake Chad. Any effort to practice Islam or keep their traditional names or clothing had to be done in secrecy. And this made it extremely difficult to maintain their religion. But African Muslims found ways of practicing their faith out of the view of the enslavers. They hid it in songs such as, "Let us break bread together on our knees, with my face to the rising sun. Oh Lord, have mercy on me." And that's code language, meaning let's meet together for discussion and prayer with our faces towards the rising sun in the same manner that our forefathers did. So singing was a way that the Africans communicated their faith and kept their connection with each other. In the antebellum South, several slaves such as Abdul Rahman, Bilal Muhammad, Salih Bilal, and Yara Mahmud, who clearly maintained Islamic names. One of these men, Abdul Rahman, after gaining his freedom, went as far as to meet President John Quincy Adams on his trek back to his native Africa. Among such slaves were Omar Ibn Said, whose life and legacy we are here to celebrate tonight. We thank Imam Bobby Hamid, who is with us tonight. Imam Hamid is the resident Imam of Masjid Omar Ibn Said in Fayetteville. So again, we welcome you to Masjid Ash-Shaheed and pray that this will be a moment of education for all of us. Peace be unto you.
We're going to have Imam Nasif Majid give the announcements for our special guest. And as he's making his way to the front, the term Bilalian, now when I look on social media in terms of young people my age in our community have really gravitated towards that term.
God's peace be on you. Assalamu alaikum. I have the distinct honor to introduce to you, recognize our distinguished guest this evening. My name is Nasif Majid, and I am the representative from North Carolina House District of 99. And we also have Representative Carla Cunningham, represents, please stand, representative from the District 106. We have is Senator Mujtaba Muhammad here? I didn't see him. Maybe he's coming a little later. Commissioner Trevor Fuller, okay, County Commissioner at Large. Commissioner Velma Leak, from the what's that? The most powerful district in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. Commissioner Leak. That's District 2, right? Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We have the Honorable Jennifer Roberts, our former mayor. Mayor Roberts, thank you. Now, we have Dr. Robert Akiri. She wears many hats. I call her a community strategist. Would you? Where's Dr. Robert? Thank you. Okay. And some of the community leaders we have here, Reverend Yvonne Majetters. Please, she's a Navy veteran, and she works with the Hearts and Hands Outreach Ministries. Reverend Majetters. Ms. Marina Martinez. She's the president of Hispanic Youth Business Organization. Youth Business Organization, please. Thank you. So, thank you for coming, and we all excited about this great program today, and I'm standing by, ready to be educated. Thank you.
So in just a moment, we're going to have Imam Atif come up and give commentary on the two surahs that were historically found in the autobiography of Omar Ibn Said. And at the beginning of the program, we had Hafiz Muhsin Siddiqui come up and recite. He gave the Al-Fatiha and he did some recitation for us. So now we're going to have Imam Atif come up.
In the name of Allah, the most merciful and compassionate. I will talk to you about the first two verses of chapter 67, Surah Mulk. This is what Muhsin recited. And because of its special connection with Omar Ibn Saeed, the person we're celebrating today, and his legacy. Now, this affinity that he had with this surah was not coincidental. This is not something that came out of nowhere, but it's because of the message of these verses in this specific chapter of the Quran that is very telling as to who he was and where he was in terms of his mental and spiritual state. God says, تَبَارَكَ الَّذِي بِيَدِهِ الْمُلْكِ, that blessed is he in whose hand is dominion. This verse is powerful because it mentions also the name by which this chapter is known, the chapter Mulk, dominion, sovereignty, power. When a slave, a man who's imprisoned, is talking about power, he's not talking about his oppressor. He's talking about true power, true dominion, absolute sovereignty. And that is only for God. So he's recognizing that for those that have enslaved, for those that are wronging, for those that may seem in power, nevertheless, it is still God who has dominion. وَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٍ, and he is upon all things competent, able. That there's nothing that happens without the will of God. And that even in this circumstance, power and ability belongs only to God. So those that claim power over my body, those that claim my freedom, even now, true power is only for God. الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ. And he speaks of a God, the one who created death and life. Now, the scholars, they say that the order might confuse some, because over here it's not said that he created life and death. He says he created death and life to emphasize that this life that we have, it will come to an end. And those that persecute, those that oppress and enslave, that like those they are oppressing, they themselves also will face death. Death is the equalizer. Death is a reality that every man who claims to have power over others and who claims to be the master will also face. And it is God who has created death. So true power belongs to God, who will not face death, but who has created death itself. And after that death, wal hayat, is life. So even when the body is suffering, even when people are oppressed, persecuted, enslaved, and made to be disgraced, even then there's a life. And that life will not face death again, and that is the eternal life, and that is the life of the afterlife, after this world, in which there will be true justice. So the reminder that after death there is a life, this is to give hope. So when a master is beating the body, but he has not broken the soul, this is faith. And Omar Ibn Saeed had faith. Even in his persecution and enslavement, he is aware and fully under the notion that there is still an afterlife. لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. And that Allah has tested you, and Allah tests you to see that which of you are the best in good deeds. So the only standard of success and righteousness and piety and true value is that of doing good. So even in a state where you have been enslaved, where you have been broken and you have been humiliated and disgraced, even then you know that your value is not what your master says it is, but it is your actions and your deeds. So even then it's very important that we recognize that our purpose of existence, regardless of the tribulations, regardless of the obstacles and hurdles we may face as human beings, even then we must uphold this standard by which God will judge, by which our success is predicated upon. And that is good action, good deeds. وَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الْغَفُورُ. And He is the Almighty. Now Aziz is not just the one who is mighty, but the one who is victorious. Al-Aziz means in the end, True victory is only for God. Men die, civilizations fail, communities waver. But God, the Creator, Allah, the one who has bestowed upon His mercy and grace, He will never fail. And the people who think that they are winning, the people who think that they have power, the people who oppress and wrong others in the name of some perceived superiority, let them know in the end only God is victorious. In the end only God is the one who truly will win. But this is for those that are not afraid of retribution or not aware of their heedlessness. And for those that are aware, there is also mention of God being Ghafur, merciful. So with our mistakes, if we show humility and recognize that we are the ones that are the servants of the true Master, that God is the true Lord and Creator, and the one who has absolute dominion and power over all human beings, regardless of color, of skin, ethnicity, language, or any other divisions that we dwell upon, and use as a means of taking away that harmony and that peace that God wants us to put on this earth. It is a reminder that even now there's an opportunity for you to seek repentance. And I pray that God gives us that divine grace and opportunity to seek His repentance and to truly submit to Him. Jazakallah.
Alhamdulillah. So at this time, we are going to invite Imam Bobby Hamid to come up and be the keynote speaker for this evening.
With Allah's name, the merciful benefactor, merciful redeemer, I bring you all greetings and peace. Assalamu alaikum. That is, peace be on you. Sister, you make sure you keep my time for me. About, I think I said 20 minutes. It's tough to do Omar in 20 minutes, but I'll try. Greetings and peace on each and every one of you, from the believers of Masjid Omar Ibn Saeed in Fayetteville, North Carolina, of which I am the imam or prayer leader, the spiritual leader for the community there. A very beautiful community of faithful and devoted servants, and we bring greetings. It is my honor and a privilege to be a part of this legacy, this remembrance of Omar Ibn Saeed. What is a legacy? A legacy is typically defined as, we think of it in terms of a will, what you receive by way of a will, but we can look at a legacy as a gift or bequeathal, or something that we receive. So what then is our takeaway from the legacy? What is our benefit? What is our gift from the legacy of Omar Ibn Saeed? I didn't come really to give you a scholarly treatise, a systematic, scientific work presentation in oral form. I really just came to give you my personal observation woven with some, if you'll permit me, some assumptions about the life of Omar Ibn Saeed. You have to think with me through these assumptions. And hopefully I'll remind you when I'm making the assumption for you to think with me through the assumptions. But I will say just simply this. When I stand up in that building made of steel, concrete, I look up and I look around sometimes if I'm there with a group or perhaps I'm there alone. And I wonder to myself, would he have known? Could he have imagined that a century plus later that there would be an edifice, a building, a structure named in his honor. I believe he could. This is an assumption because in the Quran it says what comes later will be better than what comes former. So he had to have this visionary idea, as Muslims should, as all people of faith should. So what is the takeaway? I'm going to give you a few takeaways. First takeaway is in the obvious. The first three takeaways are very obvious. That he could write. Omar Ibn Said could write. This is significant that he could write at a time where many people could not write. Now we're dealing with two situations here. We're dealing with the English language, which he called the language of the Christians, and we're dealing with Arabic. So we have to make a distinction. Omar Ibn Said arrived from Africa in Charleston. He found himself in Fayetteville just 3 years after his arrival. He was arrested, and I'll come back to some of this, but he could write. He wrote in Arabic. Now his Arabic was the Arabic that we call the Maghribi. I don't know if we have any samples of the Maghribi, if you've seen, Maghrib meaning west of Arabia, Maghrib to the west, to the way of the direction of the setting sun, the Maghrib, the Africans. They created their own style of penmanship for the Arabic. It's distinct, its form, its syntax is very distinct and exact. They understood it. He wrote it on the walls of the Cumberland County Jail. By the way, I spent 7 years in the Cumberland County Jail, but I was employed there. And even there, sometimes I reflected on Omar Ibn Said. Courts is not the same jail that he was in. Thank God. I could leave in the evening. The takeaway. The Maghribi form of writing was an intrigue to those who came to see him. Very much an intrigue. Now we're talking about a day when writing denotes personal status in the 19th century. Writing meant something when a person could write. Even though he wasn't writing in English, he was writing in Arabic to take note of its. Now this is not the writing that we see in his autobiography. You see styles of the Maghribi writing there, but it changes. Some of it's very clear. It's perfectly aligned. Some of it's kind of offline. He was an old man then. But 3 years after arriving, he was in the jail writing in this Maghribi script. He knew its syntax. He wrote it with perfection, and it caught the attention of people in the town. So he could write, and that's saying something. And the Quran says that he taught man the use of the pen. Alamal bil qalam. He taught us how to write. Writing then becomes an extension of one's thinking. This is some jumping to somewhere else here, but try it. Anytime you have to write, most of us, it's going to take us a long time, right? We got to think it out before we can put it in the tip of a pen. We're going back, we're changing it. Everybody's now is doing this, right? We got spell check and grammar check. But writing is tough. It's an extension of one's thinking. But Omar was able to write extremely well. In this act of writing, the most important thing is that it caught people's attention, and it no doubt sealed his fate, which we will share more of, which is a very favorable fate, because people took note of it, knew he was a man of distinction, even though it wasn't in the English, and that probably is what saved him from maybe a different fate, the ability simply to write the Maghribi script to catch people's attention in the Cumberland County Jail. Next takeaway, the obvious to most of us. He was literate. In the 19th century, around his time, the literacy rate was low, particularly in the South, about 59% for men, much less, around 30% for women. Just literacy itself, to speak well. Most people could not write, we're back to writing their name, and they didn't speak well often in early American society. the educated and affluent were much better at it than the average common folk. We see that he was able to speak with a great ease and fluency. People who wrote on him, who conversed with him, even though many times they did not understand what he was saying, said that he spoke with great ease and fluency. So he was able to speak well. And that bodes well because if we think of African Americans, or black folks, if you will, they have this expression, he speaks well. That's a compliment. Now he's speaking in Arabic, but they said he speaks well. I think they said President Obama was a person who speaks well. That's a compliment. Because the language was English was not the native language for many folks. So they spoke in broken English of what they could grasp of it and comprehend and regurgitate. But he spoke well in his language, and he probably amazed many people with just his speech alone. So this is the second thing. Literate, he spoke well. He spoke so well, this is an important point, that he was visited by people who had some knowledge of spoken Arabic. Omar Ibn Said was shut down. It said that he would become quiet when people visited him, and the assumption being then that he feared that if he spoke so well with people who understood the language that they perhaps would want him to go to another place where people spoke his language, perhaps as well as he did. He was content to be where he was. Omar Ibn Said was an educated man. This is important. He was a scholar. He was an Arabic Quranic scholar. He viewed the world through the lens of the Quran. This is important. He viewed the world through the prism of the Quran. It is said that people of his education would be the equivalency of a doctor in our academic system. So he was an educated man. The third point, takeaway point I want to make is that Omar Ibn Said was a Muslim. Now, I'm going to leave the idea of whether he was a Muslim or whether he remained a Muslim or he became a Christian. I'll leave that to the people who write the scholarly treatise and the academics and the historians. But I think if you understand Arabic, you've looked at his work. I understand Arabic, I can read it. I can see what he's writing. And you see it enough to know that a man who was an Islamic Quranic scholar, understanding that the Quran says, die not except in a state of submission, we say al-Islam, that he retained his faith. Well, he went to church, Brother Imam. This I know. It is said in his narrative that he would enter big houses to pray or to look for others. I make an assumption then that Omar found churches along his trek from Charlestown to Fayetteville. And the church probably had the most notable semblance to a mosque from West Africa. They don't know what he was referring to when he said he went into big houses to pray. You can imagine in the 1800s, 19th century, 1800s, that churches were unlocked. They were just like we see churches today in communities as he walked, rode, or however some of the details are not there for us. So that doesn't really preclude the fact that Omar changed his faith. We as Muslims are taught to take care and to help with the preservation of other houses of worship. If I was in a place, perhaps where there was no mosque and I was as lost as Omar was, I'd probably enter a church too. So, because it would have an appeal that a house wouldn't have. It would be a building that stood with a tall steeple that would make me think perhaps this is a place that I could go, that I'll be safe. So that's enough of that subject. So the ambrotype, do we have a picture? Does anyone have, I should have brought the ambrotype. The ambrotype is a picture. And I'm using the word of its era or its time. And I don't know the science of photography. No one has the ambrotype. So your assignment then is to go Google Omar Ibn Said. It's the same couple of pictures. He's sitting there. But I want you to do something. I just want you to look into his face. I want you to peer into his eyes. And I want you to just see what thoughts come to your mind. That's your assignment. Now, this ambrotype is very important, though, because it shows a couple of things. It shows the importance of Omar Ibn Said to be a slave. And if you look how he's dressed like a prominent citizen. He's not raggedy by any means. He is not raggedy. He is not like the man who works and toils in the field with tattered and torn clothing, or even better clothing than that, but his clothes is better than that. Very nice, very nicely dressed. That shows some importance on Omar Ibn Said, and it also shows that the Owens family was a prominent family, because that was early. Ambrotype is an early. What is this? He's in the room. What are you doing back there? I'd like to see a bigger one, but okay. Y'all can do it. You can do it on your own. You can do it on your own. Ahmed Kenya, as the sister read, has an article in the February 8th Muslim Journal that goes into this subject, did Omar Ibn Said become a Christian? We're brothers and sisters in faith. Enough of the conflict and the divisiveness. And Muslims, you Muslims here should be careful how you refer to Christians as kafirs. Now I'm going to go out on a limb here. When I first heard this word, kafir, it was relative to South Africa and apartheid. A book was written, Kafir Boy. And I'm going to say it, I hope I don't start anybody, but that just means like nigger boy. It's a dirty word. And we Muslims, some of us, not me, not people in my association, we don't find ourselves referring to Christians as kafirs. It's an ugly word. You can be a Christian who's a kafir. You can be, this is a disbeliever, a person who doesn't believe in God. A person then can be a Muslim and also be a kafir. I can prove and I can attest to that. You can be a disbeliever. You can claim something in word only. Now, back to the ambrotype. If you look at the ambrotype, Omar is dressed well. His head is covered, which is not a requirement for the men in Islam, but it's nice when you don't have a bib and you're in a climate you want to prostrate. There's no bib in the way. Look at what you see in terms of what is exposed. His face is exposed and his hands are exposed. This is telling me something. This is an assumption again. That for us, the Muslims, when we make our ritual washing and cleansing before we pray, we wash our hands. Oh God, oh Allah, and I may use God and Allah interchangeable, I'm referring to the same source. Cleanse my actions, purify my actions. When I wash my face, oh Allah, oh God, cleanse my character, purify my character. The face represents the character and the hands represent the actions. Omar Ibn Said, if I may assume, is saying to every one of us, in my life, my actions and my character on full display. That's why the mosque doesn't have stained glass windows, because everyone should be able to see what goes on in the mosque. No secrecy in the mosque. Our character and our actions, Muslims, and for all of us, should always be on full display. Now, one other thing I want to say for our doubters, he was given a Bible. The first verse in the Bible, the Arabic Bible, says, Fi al-ba'i khalaqallahu samawati wal ard. in the beginning, in the first era, God created the heavens and the earth. Remember, Omar Ibn Said is a Quranic scholar. He's read the passages in the Quran. It says, Allahul ladhi khalaqa samawati wal ard. If you were paying attention and heard what I said prior and latter, they sound similar. Fi al-ba'i khalaqa Allahu samawati wal ard. Allah, Quran is Allahu ladhi khalaqa Allahu samawati wal ard. So I'm sure when he received it, he opened it up, he read that and say, I can work with this. Because Allah is in the Quran and the Bible. Omar Ibn Said found himself in circumstances where he was inclined to be a man to not make waves. A man who was at peace, had accepted the trial, the test that had been placed upon him. And he found that he shared a common bond with the people of that book he was given, the Christians. A couple of other things. Am I doing fair? Okay. We imams, we talk for longer than 20 minutes, but we shouldn't, imams. We should make our Friday presentation 30, 40 minutes. And I'll stay on track here. A couple of other things. Personal observations, my personal observations on the life and legacy. Here's some of the things that I see. Number one, I see Omar Ibn Said as a man of humility, a humble man. Brother, you want to impress me? Show me some humility. The Quran tells us about those who walk with humility in the earth, not showing pride and arrogance. The more you're blessed, the more God rewards you, the more God enriches you. In fact, the more humility you should show. You didn't do it, God did it. Place the credit where the credit is due. He was patient. This is the next observation. This is my personal observation. Now, Omar Ibn Said died 100 years before I was born. He died in 1863. Some say 1864. I was born in 1963. So it was exactly 100 years between his passing and my birth. So it's not a long time, really, when you think about it. So he was patient. And those of you who are readers of the Quran know patience. Patience is a virtue for the Muslim. It's a virtue for any faithful person and God-fearing person. We have to be patient in whatever circumstance we may find ourselves. Omar Ibn Said never requested to leave Fayetteville or Bladen County. He never sought, like others, to be sent back to his homeland. I think he had been reserved to his fate. He accepted it, and he was going to be patient throughout the rest of his life. There's a reason for that I'll touch on in a moment. And finally, a personal observation takeaway, that he was able to see the good and the bad in people. He went to some length to make sure he described the nature of people that he met that impacted his life. For example, the first man or owner of Omar Ibn Said in Charlestown, I like to call it Charlestown, the way many people do. Well, I'm talking about Charleston, South Carolina. The first man was cruel. Omar described this man as having no fear of God at all. But he met a second man, an owner there in Charlestown. He said, let me back up. The first man he described as a good man. This man died about a year later. The second man was the man he described as a man having no fear of God at all. He had enough of that man and he left and came to Fayetteville, North Carolina. When he, of course, there's not enough time to narrate the story, and there's no need to. There's many sources to narrate the story of Omar Ibn Said's life. So these are more personal takeaways and assumptions, so I'll stay there. But he was able to meet a man who wanted, asked that he go back. The man is named Hunter. Sometimes I make the assumption that Hunter was a slave hunter. He was a man who tracked runaways, hunter. He hunted the runaway. He asked Omar to go to Charlestown, and Omar said, no, 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 no. All narratives report that he said about 10 no's. He did not want any parts of Charleston or Charlestown. Now, it's something special in regards to the Owen family. He said you couldn't find better men than Jim and John Owens and their generations, meaning their offspring and children. So Omar, being a man, he looked at the character of people. He recognized the good in people, even in his predicament. And he also was able to use discernment to recognize what was good in a human being, even in his predicament. You have to know a little bit about Jim Owens. Jim Owens became a governor of North Carolina. So it's always good to know the company you keep, right? Or at least the company that kept Omar, right? So he became the governor of North Carolina. I don't have the dates. I had to leave a few details out for the sake of time, but you can look up Jim Owens. He was a governor, and he also was a Whig, WHIG party leader or representative. Now, you kind of maybe a little bit on the Whig party. They were people who felt as though the poor should be educated by way of financing by the rich. Jim Owens himself believed that, or he opposed the disenfranchisement of blacks. The Whig Party of that time labeled Andrew Jackson King Andrew Jackson. There's no time to go into his history, but he shares common history with Silent Sam and so many others. So that should tell you their perception on slavery and people like Omar Ibn Said. So you have to think with me through this now. You have to use your intelligence to kind of fill in some things. Okay, so he had a lot of respect for the Owens. He felt like he had met people that were faithful people who believed in God. Omar went to church with the Owens family. Omar wasn't the average kind of guy. His dress tells us that. Where he accompanied the Owens tells us that. And there's a First Presbyterian Church in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and Omar is in their archives. And again, if I was in a place unknown to me and I saw good people who I believe feared God or had a reverence for God or who were regardful for God, those are the kind of company that I would like to keep. If they invited me to go to the house of worship, I'd go too. My personal anecdotes, and I'm going to begin to about 5 minutes or so. My first, not in terms of being at the mosque or the masjid, was that I was in an eatery. I was in a restaurant in Fayetteville on Rayford Road, and this is in the early 1990s. And there was a man who was seated at a table over from me, and this man was using very colorful and flowery discourse talking about this slave. He was on, and he not only had my attention. You know how someone's got a good story going on, you're trying to eat, but you're listening to? So I was doing that, and this man was using very colorful language, and this prince, he had servants, and he was on, and he got up and paid for his food. He went outside, I got up and paid for my food, and I was going to catch this man before he drove away. And I did. And I said, sir, can you tell me more? Where is this place? He called them Prince. Moro was the name he used for him. Prince Moro. So he told me, he said, you go down you leave Fayetteville and you go down Highway 87, you go to a Owens Hill Road, it'll be on your left. My wife lives in Wilmington, and every time I go down 87, and I gotta look down Owen Hills Road. But for this time, he told us where to go. So me and some brothers got in a car, we went down to Owen Hill Road, we stopped. We asked a lady, we were pretty much lost in the woods. We asked him, do you know is there any remnants or relics of the Owens plantation? She said, it's right over there. It's like walking distance. We went down this road a ways. So we walked over there, me and about 4 other brothers. We saw just some old houses with weeds. You know how like weeds grow up through houses and farmland and harvested timberland. So we decided to pray the prayer that the young Hafiz made, and one of us, as we all kind of somberly walked back to the car, said, this is probably the first time this verse of Quran has been recited here since Omar recited it. Needless to say, that was heartfelt. The next is in 2010. These are just personal anecdotes, my experience and personal reflection. In 2010, the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources contacted us, and I think Senator Larry Shaw was instrumental in moving this, perhaps along with others. We received a call, Imam Adam B.I. and I, and we collaborated. We helped with the language for the markers, the highway markers, historical markers. We ultimately gave the language in the marker our stamp of approval, so we had some input in that. They wanted to put it down on Owen Hills Road. We insisted that there's nothing out there, not even on Owen Hills, much on 87, much less on Owen Hill that ventures off of 87. So we sort of suggested, and it was agreed that they would put it in front of the mosque, the Masjid Omar Ibn Said. And we thanked them for that. And it's much more in a prominent area, and I understand our visitors and center that give people directions and directives around our city, note this marker, note this historic masjid in Fayetteville that's named in the honor of Omar Ibn Said, a great scholar and a Muslim. So his marker, you can look it up, NC Marks, I believe, ncmarks.com. His is I-89. Jim Owens is I-7. Sounds like highways, but these are markers. They identify, the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources identifies these markers by numbers, numerical, an alphabet with a dash and a number. Omar Ibn Said's is I-89, and Jim Owens is I-7. And the third and last one is the Sinhalese delegation that came from Senegal. We've had conversations with people from the embassy. I've had conversations with people from Senegal. They want to do more to recognize Omar as what we would think of as a favorite son. So these are cultural people in the Sinhalese government who represents culture and history. Ultimately, we want to do more collaboration with them, and they want to have a national day, perhaps. So there's so much work to do, and there's so many ways that we can take this legacy of Omar Ibn Said. That was in the marker was in 2010. I think I mentioned that. So these delegations have come to the masjid. A couple of what ifs, just a couple of what ifs I'm going to throw at you. Incidents that could have changed the fate. Omar Ibn Said came as a slave about the year before they banned the importation of slaves. What if they would have done that a year earlier? Perhaps there would have been no Omar Ibn Said in the shores of America. What if Sheriff Mumford, the Cumberland County Sheriff at that time, and even the men that apprehended him would have handled him differently, have handled him specifically and strictly by slave runaway laws? There's a lot of what ifs here. What if he would have returned to Charlestown, or what if he would have never left? The story wouldn't be the same. In conclusion, I met a man in Eastern North Carolina, and I want you to pay attention to this. I met a man, he's an African American. We were at a conference down east somewhere, Atlantic Beach, I believe. This man extolled the virtues of his name, his last name. He lives in Eastern North Carolina. He was so proud of his family name, I believe that man extolled the virtues of his name for about 5 minutes during dinner. He told me that his name was a family name. It wasn't given to him, his foreparents, as a slave name. He said it had been passed down by family members. He was very proud of his name, and the name was Hodges. Hodges. Hodge, Hodge, Hodges. Hodges. I'm a Haji, by the way. I went to Hajj, this last Hajj, alhamdulillah. Beautiful, wonderful experience. Hodges, Haji, Hodges. Perhaps, just perhaps, I can make the assumption that the proud reference to this name, Hodges, is really Hajj in English. I think the transliteration, Hajj. You get it? So then, what do we conclude by that? Some people's story, we can conclude then that we have Moro, Omaro, and it goes on, Omar Ibn Said. You see how things can get lost? So then what are we to draw from that? That some people's story yet to be told, some people's story like Omar Ibn Said's is being told, and there are stories that will never be told. There are stories that will never, only God knows, only Allah knows. So, final, we have to take pride in such stories and chronicles and legacies such as Omar Ibn Said. We have to draw lessons from these stories and these unusual and enigmatic personalities. So I want to conclude with that. I thank you all for listening, and thanks again to you all for just sharing an ear with me, and thank you, Imam, for inviting me. It's just proud for me to be able to be in a mosque named for this great Islamic scholar, and I'm just quite humbled all the time. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
So this evening, we've received history, commentary, Quranic recitation, homework, and we're here together. This is a historical moment. And again, we want to thank you, Imam Bobby Hamid, for your presentation and coming to share what he shared with us. So before I bring up Representative Carla Cunningham for the proclamation and comments, it's only right that as she come up, that we give a drum roll. Y'all ready? On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
I speak softly. Assalamu alaikum. I am humbled, more than humbled, to be here, and as well to hear you, Iman, tell the history, because so many of us miss that history. And it is awesome that this is African American History Month that we're celebrating. To the proclamation. North Carolina House of Representatives certificate. Whereas Omar Ibn Said was born in 1770 in Futataro, a kingdom of the Fulani people on the Senegal River. Omar Ibn Said was educated a teacher, tradesman, and an accomplished scholar of Islam. And whereas in 1807 Omar Ibn Said was kidnapped, enslaved, and brought to Charleston, South Carolina. He was among the last to reach the United States prior to the outlawing of the overseas slave trade that ended in 1807. Whereas in 1810, Omar Ibn Said escaped and made his way to Fayetteville, North Carolina, but was recaptured and sold to General James Owens of Bladen County, a prominent citizen who would later become a state senator and whose brother John Owen would serve as the governor of North Carolina. And whereas in 1819, Francis Scott Key presented Omar with an Arabic translation of the Bible. Omar wrote 14 manuscripts in Arabic, including the only autographical essay written by a slave in their native language. Whereas Omar Ibn Said began his autobiography by writing Surah Al-Mulk, a chapter in the Quran that discusses how only God is the true master. This writing is currently housed in the Library of Congress. And whereas some historians claim that Omar converted to Christianity, while other scholars believe he continued to practice Islam based on dedications of Muhammad written in his Bible and a card dated 1857 on which he wrote Surah An-Nasr, a short chapter of the Quran. And whereas Omar Ibn Said died in 1864, he was over 90 years old and was still enslaved in the Owens family. He is buried in Bladen County, North Carolina. In 1991, an American mosque was named after Omar Ibn Said, and in 2010, the state erected a historical marker honoring him. During Black History Month, stories like Omar Ibn Said remind us that Muslims were not strangers in early America and have in fact been an important part of our collective history. Now, therefore, I, Carla D. Cunningham, North Carolina House of Representatives, serving the 100th District of Mecklenburg County, hereby proclaim Friday, February the 7th as Omar Ibn Said Day. Thank you. Please, with the recipients, join me.
Imam Bobby.
Sean. Imam Bobby. Thank you.
We want to give a special thanks to Dr. Rabi Akir and, of course, Representative Carla Cunningham. And at this time, we're going to have Dr. Hadia Mubarak come up and do the closing dua.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace and blessings be upon all of you. So I was told to give a few closing comments, if that's okay, and end with a prayer, inshallah. Although my family's personal narrative is one of immigration to America, it would be a mistake to view the history of Islam in America through the lens of immigrants like my own parents, arriving on the shores of this country only in the last few decades of the 20th century. While our public conception of Islam in America or of Muslims in America tends to be synonymous with words like immigrants, foreigners, and refugees, the reality is that the history of Islam in America begins with scores of African slaves forced into bondage who built this country through their hard labor, sweat, and tears. The history of Islam in America begins with slaves like Job bin Solomon, the son of a prominent Muslim scholar who was brought to the United States from Gambia in 1731. It begins with folks like Yaro Mahmoud, who was enslaved at the age of 16 and brought to Annapolis, Maryland in 1752. Like Solomon and Omar Ibn Said, he could write and read in Arabic. And he also, at Georgetown. He becomes the first African property owner in the DC metropolitan area. And there's also, for those of you who visit DC, I highly encourage you to visit his home on Kent Place. The history of Muslims in America begins with men like Omar Ibn Said, a Muslim scholar whose legacy we are celebrating here tonight. The stories of these slaves and many others offer just a glimpse into a part of American history that we've neglected to tell. And by the way, this is not a part of African American history or Muslim history, but it is a part of American history that we need to reclaim. In the current political context in which we find ourselves, it is important to bear in mind this largely neglected history of Muslims in America. As an assistant professor in religious studies who has the privilege of teaching Islam at U.S. institutions of higher education, I feel personally indebted to the legacy of Omar Ibn Said and others like him. I cannot even begin to fathom what it must have been like for him to arrive to a new land, to be forced to contend with a new culture, a new language, a new religion, and to be completely stripped of one's identity and freedom. And it's through the resolve of men and women like Ibn Said that Muslims in America today can freely practice Islam and even teach Islam at the highest levels of our country's institutions. The autobiography of Ibn Said speaks to his faith and perseverance. His references to the 67th chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Mulk, the chapter of dominion, is not incidental. It reflects the faith of a man who understood and internalized the ultimate reality of God's dominion over all things. It reflects the knowledge of a man who recognized that the only real master in this world is the creator of the heavens and earth and everything in between. In honor of his memory, I would like to end our event tonight by reciting Surah Al-Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Quran, upon his soul. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, all praise is due to God alone, the sustainer of all the worlds, the most gracious, the dispenser of grace, Lord of the day of judgment. You alone do we worship, and you alone do we turn to for aid. Guide us upon the straight path, the path of those whom you have bestowed your blessings, not of those who have been condemned, nor of those who go astray. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. We have refreshments in the back. You are free to help yourself, and we thank everyone, each and every one of you, for coming out and enjoying this moment. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
You mentioned that they can watch it if they look on our YouTube page at Masjid Ash-Shaheed. They want to watch the event.
Masjid Ash-Shaheed YouTube page. Assalamu alaikum. One more thing. If you would like to watch this, the replay of it, we have our own Masjid Ash-Shaheed YouTube channel. Please subscribe to our channel. You can watch this once it's uploaded. Assalamu alaikum. Imam Naeem. How was everything in MSA? Good. How do I turn this off?